Some artists define an era for an entire generation. Everyone from Elvis to Eilish is synonymous with a particular point in musical history. But with their self-titled 1983 debut album, the Violent Femmes defined an era for multiple generations. And they did that not by embodying a specific moment in time, but rather by embodying the essence of a shared era, the essence of adolescence. And they did that by capturing a timeless sound and songs that perfectly capture that nervous energy and angst and awkwardness and sheer fun of being a teenager. This album is one of the great slow burners, a torch that shows no sign of being snuffed out as it's passed on from one generation of indie kids to the next and to the next, like a note being handed around a classroom until one day the teacher spots it and then as punishment forces it to perform in a very, very awkward cameo on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Welcome to 2020 Sound, the channel where we take a look back at the more overlooked, the more cult aspects of indie and alternative rock history. If that sounds like something you'd like to watch more videos about, then do please subscribe. The Violent Femmes eponymous album is one of the ultimate cult classics, taking 8 years to sell the 1 million copies required to reach platinum status when the band had a second wave of popularity in the early 90s alt-rock boom. And it's a record most known for one song in particular, a song so magnificently catchy and iconic, even its drums are instantly recognisable. Blister in the Sun will never fail to ignite a crowd, having clapped its way into pop culture history. From its prominent use in the movie Grosse Pointe Blank to where I first heard it, the scene in My So-Called Life where young Claire Danes joyfully bounces around her bedroom to it. Let me go on. Weird as it is to watch a young girl dancing around to a song in which Gordon Gano sings about staying in his sheets, it does at least capture perfectly the sheer joy of that song. It's essentially a love song, although admittedly a love song that has frequently been interpreted as being about self-pleasure. Although apparently Gano says that's not right. Supposedly the song has more to do with a couple being affected by drug use and one of the partners being unable to perform, shall we say, to the best of his ability. Somehow it manages to balance this seedy sexual undertone with a song that is so melodic and instantly singable that a kid's entertainer could very easily slip it into the middle of a set next to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star without raising any eyebrows from parents about the tears and other bodily fluids referenced in this song. Glorious as it is, I think that Blister in the Sun has overshadowed most of the album and, let's be honest, most of their career, which is a damn shame, especially for the album, because this is truly one of the greatest debut albums of all time in my opinion. But it seems to be much less frequently talked about than its contemporaries, such as the other big college rock debut album from 1983, R.E.M's equally great Murmur. And one of the reasons for that may be that on those rare occasions that you do encounter a Violent Femmes song that isn't Blister in the Sun, it's often completely out of context. In a retrospective review for Pitchfork, Stephen Hayden described the band as perhaps the greatest mixtape band of their era. And in fact, in an interview with Consequence of Sound, Gordon Gano said, "I think the majority of people found out about our music because somebody had made a tape and played it at a party. I certainly discovered their songs in a similar manner through an indie club that I went to back when I was a student in 2002 in Huddersfield. And the DJ there was great. I think his name was Jason. It was a place called Bar None, and they would play the latest stuff, you know, like the Strokes, the Coral, the Hives, and all the old perennials, the Smiths, the Cure, etc. But occasionally he would play stuff that I've never heard before, and I just love it. And I always distinctly remember him playing Add It Up and hearing Add It Up for the first time and hearing that thin, whiny a cappella at the start and thinking, what is this? But then the rest of the band kick in and the verse hook kicks in, and then I'm thinking, what is this? Why can't I get just one kiss? Why can't I get
just one kiss.
What a song, and I can't get no satisfaction for the 80s, but unlike Mick Jagger, Gordon Gano tells you precisely what satisfaction he can't get.
Why can't I get just one fuck?
And just like that, this small student community of indie kids was bouncing around the room to this folk punk racket, this bastard love child of the Buzzcocks and Bob Dylan, like we'd known it all our lives. Because that's what it felt like. It was just completely infectious. And the infection spread even further when he dropped Kiss Off with its instantly anthemic countdown.
10, 10, 10, 10, for everything, 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 everything.
Shout-alongs don't get much more fun and cathartic than that. The reason why this music worked so well in 1983, why it worked so well in the early 90s, why it worked so well in the early 2000s when I discovered it, and why it still works so well to this day, is that the ingredients are utterly timeless. This album is so stripped down and raw and recorded with so few effects that, similarly to what I said about the Lars debut album, it sounds like it could have come out at any point in the last 70 years. Granted, there's a punk snarl here and explicit lyrics that absolutely would not have made it onto a record in the 50s. But that aside, technically, this album could have been made then and it would have sounded more or less the same. There's nothing here that would have sounded out of place on one of those Sun Records recordings from Elvis Presley or Jerry Lee Lewis or Johnny Cash, and in fact, according to Pitchfork, producer Mark Van Heck, that was his plan all along. He wanted the album to sound like a classic, early rock and roll Sun Records album, and he absolutely achieves that. But the simplicity isn't limited to just the recordings and the arrangements. The actual songs themselves are instantly singable and memorable, from the 60s swing of Prove My Love
What do I have to do? Tell me now. What do I have to do? Tell me now.
to the pleading Please Do Not Go.
Please, please, please do not go.
Of course, there's nothing easy about making something sound easy. Well, this music is just so refreshingly unpretentious and no frills, and has more hooks than a cloakroom. Having said that, as simple and singable as these songs are, they are definitely underpinned with something that is unhinged and intense. The melodies invite you in, but the unpredictability of that intensity is what keeps you on edge and invested. Gano comes across like the weird kid at the back of the classroom who you never know if one day he's just going to completely flip out and you don't know what he's going to do. The best example of that is probably the non-album single Give Me the Car, which is featured as a bonus track on a lot of copies of the album. It's a really dark tale of a guy trying to convince his father to lend him his car in order to go out, pick up a girl, get her drunk and try and convince her to sleep with him.
Touch her all over her body, and she can touch me.
It's a deeply uncomfortable listen, but executed so well. The story unfolds and you realise just how dysfunctional and self-loathing this guy is, and it just captivates you. It's a really captivating, twisted slice of melodrama. There's that sense of danger just bubbling away into the whole album, and again that ties it back to its rock and roll roots beautifully. It's reminiscent of the threat in the clangs of Link Wray's guitar in the song Rumble, or the teenage riots in London and Dublin when kids for the first time heard Rock Around the Clock in the cinema. It's like Grease for freaks and geeks. Simple as these songs may be, there's a real sophistication to the way that they're played. De Lorenzo makes more of an impression with a single snare drum than many drummers make with a 20-piece kit. And bass player Brian Ritchie, his virtuoso playing fills in the space with these intricate, fun parts that just give the song so much breadth. And perhaps most important of all is the band's control of dynamics. They are absolute masters of tension and release. They know when to hold back and build and explode. These songs are garage rock roller coasters. It's like that classic thing of artists exploring the limits of what they can do with a very restricted amount of ingredients. You don't notice how sparse these songs are because they use these mostly acoustic instruments so expertly to craft excitement. Acoustic music is traditionally bucolic and beautiful. So it's really interesting that this album is, and I mean this in the most complimentary way I can mean it, it's amazing how ugly this album is. The songs are fantastic, but they are not pretty affairs. They are an exercise in controlled, catchy chaos, exploring murky emotions and urges with a demented glee. But the exception to that is the beautiful closing track, Good Feeling. It reminds me of one of the Velvet Underground's gorgeous ballads and works perfectly as a palate cleanser. After all the mischief and the sneering and the smirking of the other songs, the band sound romantic and tender here. It's a genuinely heartwarming way to end the album. It's amazing to think that Gano apparently wrote a lot of these songs whilst he was still in high school, because frankly, for me, some of these songs are amongst the greatest songs I've ever heard. In fact, Gano was only 17 years old when, as legend has it, the band were busking in front of Milwaukee's Oriental Theatre when James Honeyman Scott from the Pretenders walked by and saw them and liked them so much that he invited them in to open for the band that very night. But perhaps it's his youth at the time that makes the experience so authentic, and the frustration which fuels so many of these songs so palpable and enjoyable. Regardless of your age, Violent Femmes' debut album always conjures up the excitement of adolescence. At its heart, rock and roll is a teenage art form. You may grow older, you may even grow wiser, but with the energy that it has mainlined straight from the roots of rock and roll, Violent Femmes' debut album remains an elixir of youth for anyone who chooses to indulge in its impish charms, and it hasn't aged a day in the last 4 decades. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know how you discovered Violent Femmes songs beyond Blister in the Sun in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, do please share it and give it a like. And if you'd like to watch further videos all about overlooked music from indie and alternative rock history, then do please subscribe.